If you're like most couples who are preparing for a marriage-based immigration interview, you're probably scouring the internet for all the best questions, the lists of the most popular questions on marriage-based green card interviews. And I totally understand why you would do that. And I am going to give you a lot of good tips about the most popular types of questions that are asked. But first, let's talk a little bit about how the interviewing, the sort of the relationship portion of an interview works so that you understand what it is and what it's not. Because I've found that a lot of times when people are looking for lists of questions, they have sort of the misconception that the way these interviews work is that it's like a quiz. You could have flashcards, but it's like, what's their favorite color? What's their favorite t-shirt? How many rooms are in your house? What color is their toothbrush? And it has like just a huge volume of minute, like concrete details about this person that's like studying for a test or something. And so that's not actually how these interviews work. They are really a conversation, either with both members of the couple together, or in some cases, just one member of the partnership, and then the other person later follows up. But either way, they're not going to just drill you on random factoids about your partner. So that sort of list is not super helpful. The way the interviews work is that they're going to start a conversation with some typical questions about things, and I'm going to get into in a little bit after this. I'm going to explain sort of what are the main things they would typically start with or cover in the interview. But they're going to try to get into enough detail, several layers deep into the conversation, where you wouldn't have practiced that detail. So let me give you an example. Let's say that they say, have you traveled anywhere together recently? And you say, yeah, we went on a long weekend away to, this place. Then the officer would say, oh, and, how did you get there? And you might say, oh, well, we drove in the car. Oh, which one of you drove? Oh, how long did it take? And then they might ask you more follow-up questions about what you did when you were there. If you saw anybody else you knew, maybe you answer, yeah, we met up with this one friend. And then they would say, well, what's that friend's name? How did you meet that friend? Things like that. So basically, if you made a list of all of the questions they asked, most of them wouldn't make any sense to anybody else other than you, because they're all based on the previous answers that you gave. So it's just going to be a normal conversation, but they're going to try to get into certain details to really confirm that these things really happened, that you truly do live a life together. So I'm going to cover what are those main categories of topics that they tend to ask questions about, but with the understanding, I just want to make it clear to you that this is going to go, several layers deep into detail about whatever your answers are for these questions. So one of them I sort of already mentioned, which would be vacations, special occasions, holidays, and traveling that you've done as a couple. They ask questions about that frequently. And so for any of those trips that you've had or vacations, you'd also want to review with each other, just refresh your memory about the details of how all of those things happened and what you did and when it was and how long it was and all that kind of stuff, just so that you have that fresh in your mind, because they can ask about that. Another thing they like to ask about is your daily routines. So, which side of the bed do you sleep on? Who gets up first? Do you, do you make coffee or do you drink tea in the morning? Each other's commute times or work schedules. If you have kids or pets, sort of like the care of that, or the things in the household, like who cooks dinner, who takes out the trash, stuff like that. Just daily routine sort of and habit questions are a common category as well. Sort of tied to your routines or current lifestyles, but a more specific category that you definitely want to make sure that you're prepared to talk about is your financial lives, individually and together. So where do you hold your accounts? How does money flow through the household and fund everything? Do you each get paid into your individual accounts and then transfer a certain amount of money over to a joint account where you pay the bills from? Or how does it work in your specific scenario? They would expect you to also know things about your partner, like how much money they make, when they're paid, how much they're paid, specifically, if it's like a check or a direct deposit or every 2 weeks or once a month, or the details of that would be sort of typical fodder for them to ask questions about. Another thing that you want to make sure that you've talked about is where you hold different types of household accounts, like who's your internet provider, who's your cell phone provider, who's your, like all of the things. So I know it's not uncommon for people in a partnership to maybe one person's more of a paperwork person than the other, and they kind of defer to them, like, okay, like you just handle all this and I'll handle these other things. So if that's your scenario, I mean, that's totally your choice, but you definitely want to make sure that the person who's not as familiar with it, that they're at least familiar enough to answer basic questions about that, in the interview. And of course, if ultimately immigration asks you a question that you don't know the answer to, it's perfectly fine to say that you don't know or you can't remember. And that's better than guessing. Like, say you don't remember who your internet provider is and you're like, I don't know. And then you just say, like, I don't know, Verizon, but you're not sure. And that turns out not to be it. That would be not as good. So review all this stuff ahead of time. But if you don't know for sure, then it's okay to say that you don't know it. But the financial stuff is definitely important. They sort of expect you to have discussed and be generally aware of these things, between the members of the couple. And the final major category that I recommend you also review is your personal histories. So, what happened in each of your lives before you got together? Where are you from? Where did you live as children? Your siblings, your parents, where are those family members still in the world? Have you met these other people? If you are the U.S. partner, you should understand the basic immigration history of your spouse. Like, what kind of visa did they come with? If they were a student and maybe they got a work visa, then they married you, or whatever the scenario is, you want to understand kind of where they've been on an immigration perspective as well. And also, you should know about each other's children, each other's previous relationships. I have seen in some couples, there's sort of like people are in relationship in different ways. So some people like talk about everything and they know each other's histories. But I have met some people who are kind of like, what, that happened in the past and we don't really care where we were, what we did before we met each other. And so we've never really brought that up and we don't really care. So it's like, that's totally a fine way to live your life if that works for both of you. But for immigration purposes, it doesn't look good from immigration's perspective if you don't know things like your current spouse's former spouse's name or something like that. So you want to just know each other's personal histories, at least the broad strokes of kind of where they've been and what they've done in their lives. All right, so those are the main categories. I know it's not exactly like you were looking for a list of exactly 2,000 questions they were going to ask you or something like that, but I promise I've been doing this for more than a decade, and reviewing those major categories has been by far the best way for my clients to prepare for this type of interview and be successful. So good luck.